Greetings and welcome to my home just outside of San Antonio, Texas. I'm John Kiernan, and in the next couple minutes I'm going to share with you the experimental portion of my master's degree that I completed at the University of Exeter in experimental archaeology. The theme, the Flint daggers of the Beaker Culture from the United Kingdom, particularly looking at their function as a combative weapon, if they were ever used that way. With that said, I will go on record right now by saying that no flint dagger, whether it be from Scandinavia or from England or anywhere else, were ever designed as a primary weapon. They have complex biographies, and we're going to explore just one part of that today. The research problem that emerges from this is that so many people in literature over the years have equated flint daggers to basically cutting tools. The only testing they've done with them has been cutting type testing. Just out of literature, I pulled these things, and I will paraphrase these. Flint daggers do not seem to be an efficient combat weapon due to fragile flint material. They have no physical function. Other comments such as could not have functioned as stabbing tools like metal daggers. Also, excellent hunting weapons for slaughtering game. And lastly, flint daggers were used only to sacrifice animals and therefore had no use in battle. With these in mind, we set the experiment into action. What are some of the variables that we had to look at, or I had to look at before I conducted this? First off, I had to look at this as flint daggers as a combative weapon. So I had to first make a couple of flint daggers, but I'll talk a little bit about why I chose the ones that I did in the next section. We also had to look at how do I use this dagger. Sorry for the squeamish out there, you kind of have to know where to put them for them to be effective. So soft targets were selected. I'll get into the specifics, but when I'm saying soft targets, I'm talking about places without bone protecting them. And lastly, one of the biggest variables we had to look at was clothing and skin. Clothing puts a lot of resistance for a blade and keeps it from doing its ultimate cutting job, or can actually slow it down if something's trying to pierce into the skin. With clothing, we know that during the late Neolithic and early Bronze Age, they had wool from sheep, and they were spinning that, or we see little glimpses of that. Also, they had flax. So I had one of my classmates make a little tunic for the ballistics gel dummy that we ended up using. Part of it, the front part was made out of wool, and the back part was made out of linen, so that we could test both of these clothing items on the torso when we're doing the testing, because they are, once again, putting a layer between the blade and the body. The other thing was, I could either use an animal or I could use something different. I chose a ballistics gel dummy for ethical reasons. I worked with a company out of the UK, went with a 20% ballistics gel blend, which is actually stiffer, and I had a layer of imitation skin placed over the torso to add that skin resistance layer. After variables, we have to look at the methodology. How are we going to actually bring this into play? Well, first off, we need to consider the area of our testing. We're looking at this from a close quarters combat perspective, because I don't care how big your dagger is, you're not going to be able to reach out and touch somebody from 100 meters away with it. Again, not a primary weapon system. So ranges of combat, real quickly, there's three. There's a long range, a medium range, and a close range. Close is what we're talking about, but I think the others warrant at least a moment's time. Long range is where we're talking about you're throwing rocks, you're throwing sticks, of course you're hurling insults as well, and probably some arrows. Your spear is probably not going to be used till we hit the middle range. Middle range, of course these are all variable to the encounter, but now we're still probably throwing nuisance weapons, rocks and sticks and things like that. But your spears and javelins may be starting to be thrown as well, because now you have a greater chance of actually hitting your opponent. Next, we go into close range and close quarters. Close quarters, when I'm saying close quarters, you're in punching and kicking range. If you're in punching and kicking range, now items such as flint daggers could be put into play. again, this is not what I would want to go charging up against somebody with, especially when they're using battle axes and clubs and such like that. When I'm looking at this as its efficacy as a weapon, I'm looking at, this is all I've got left. I've got to do something to protect myself. It's the fight or flight mechanism. There's two motions that I looked at here, and if you look forensically, even modernly, there's two motions that are mainly used with the blade. We have the slash, which is what we call a room-making maneuver, because who's going to want to run into you when you're swinging something sharp at them? Hopefully the answer is no one. But it's actually just creating space. The next is the thrust. The thrust is the one that we really have to be worried about, and I'll tell you why. Slashing usually ends up with superficial cuts, maybe up to 2 centimeters. Yes, that's quite a bit, but that's still superficial, as when we're talking about thrusting, penetrating, now we're talking about actually getting up to, who knows, maybe 9-10 centimeters deep. The last thing I wanted to talk about in our methodology were the daggers that I reproduced. The daggers that I reproduced are one of the several types of daggers produced during the late Neolithic, early Bronze Age in the UK. This one is considered a Class II long-tanged dagger. They usually have a series of notches on the side, which we guess were for holding on some type of haft, which means that they probably had some wood or other organic material on the tang. The next one is the Class III long tang dagger. Very similar, very broad, just like the Class II, but without the notches. So those were the two that we chose to actually utilize. So methodology-wise, we're going to actually take and use a series of slashes and a series of thrusts against the dummy. Against the dummy when it's wearing the wool, against the dummy when it's wearing the linen, and also when it was the bare torso. We did a minimum of at least 2 of the same maneuver each time. So basically, in the course of testing, I did about 60 cuts and thrusts in a session that took us about 5 to 6 hours to complete. Okay, so methodology we just covered, so now we're going to go on to testing. Here's where we're going to have a little fun. Thankfully, we did a little recording while we were doing this, so we're going to play 2 quick videos, but they should give you an idea of how we were doing this. So the very first video that you're going to see is going to demonstrate the actual slash attack, and then the next video will actually address the thrusting attack. And again, when I did this is actual, I treated it like actual combat. So some people may find it a little disturbing. Again, 1, 2, 3, there. 1, 2, 3. Ooh, didn't really do much. Okay, we just saw the 2 videos of me demonstrating the 2 different maneuvers that I carried out, both the slash and the thrust. Well, that's great, but how do we measure this? To make the most accurate measurements possible, I used several different measuring devices, from metric tapes to the wound probes that are used in medicine today. So everything is in metric, and you can see that on the picture in front of you. With the results, they were actually kind of surprising in some aspects, and in other aspects not as surprising. So first off, I break these up in series. The slash with the wool, the linen, and then with the bare torso. That's first, and then we go with the thrusting series. So the slash series, diagonal left, right, and horizontal. With the wool tunic, the average laceration to the cloth was 11.6 centimeters. The torso actually bore a wound of 8.7 centimeters average, with an average depth of 1.4 millimeters. With linen, the laceration to the cloth was 13.8 centimeters. Torso laceration was 6.7 centimeters with an average depth of 4 millimeters. The bare torso, 12.3 centimeter laceration average and an average depth of 1.5 centimeters. Moving on to the thrusting, and again, remember, we're looking at soft targets. So when I say soft targets, the internal and external jugular, the subclavian arteries on both sides of the neck, the femoral arteries in the groin region, possibly going into the abdominal area, and of course the kidneys. So all soft targets. So for thrusting, we have two different thrusts. We have a forward thrust, and then we have what we call a reverse thrust or a downward thrust, or we can even call it a subclavian thrust. With a forward thrust, using that forward or standard grip, in wool, linen, and the bare torso, an average laceration was in the skin, or in the material, excuse me, was about 1.5 centimeters. The mean laceration into the actual torso was 3.5 centimeters. The penetration was about 1.2 centimeters in the wool, 2.4 centimeters in linen, and 5.7 centimeters deep without either linen or wool. With the reverse or downward grip, average laceration in wool and linen textile was 2.8 centimeters. The average length of laceration was 5.1 centimeters, while the average depth was 4.3 centimeters in wool, 4.2 centimeters in linen, and 6.3 centimeters deep for the bare torso. Taken together, it's an average of 5 centimeters deep. Now, to test this, I invited 4 guests to also do the same thing. 2 of the young ladies had martial arts training, but no bladed training. The other 2 had none whatsoever. So out of their thrusts, they did 1 forward and 1 reverse. The average depth of the laceration was 2.3 centimeters, and this was all on a bare torso. We didn't use any of the coverings in this. And out of the 8 thrusts, there were several, there was 3 of them, that were greater than 3 centimeters deep. Now, what does all that mean? What do all those depths mean to us? Well, after talking with medical professionals, anesthesiologists, general practice doctors, and even some of my military doctor friends, we came up with an average depth of some vital areas. The average depth of most major arteries, the internal, external jugular, the subclavian, and even the femoral, is about 3 centimeters. The intestines, hid behind the abdominal muscles, at about 6 centimeters. And kidneys are about 10 centimeters deep. So what does that mean? That means that in most every type of testing that we did, other than the slashing, we were passing 3 centimeters quite handily. Even in the guests, their thrusting, they had, out of 8 thrusts, they had 3 that were over 3 centimeters deep. Okay, so let's wrap this all up. What are we saying here? We're saying that flint daggers, although not designed to be a combative weapon, if pressed into service, could have been used effectively to defend one's life, even to the point of lethality. This isn't a be-all, end-all exercise. This was just round 1. We need to do a lot more testing. And again, we're probably never going to know the truth, but at least we're making strides towards understanding our prehistoric past. That pretty much concludes the presentation, but none of this happens without the help of others. And I'd like to really quickly thank those who did help me get this accomplished. Professor Linda Hercomb, Dr. Teresa Camper, Dr. Catherine Freeman, Charlie Mansfield, one of my classmates, Sarah Schultz, one of my classmates, and of course, Jessica Perrin, who's doing all the videoing, directing, and keeping me on point. Thank you for your time, and we'll follow up with some questions next.